Alright lads, welcome back to another Stogie Lads video. Now this is one that I surprisingly have not made yet, and it's my introduction to cigars for someone getting into cigars. Either you're getting into cigars entirely, you want to get into Cuban cigars, or you want to get into non-Cuban cigars. I think there will be something here to help. Now I've held off of doing this video. I was a little surprised because I have not done a single video on beginner cigar tips at all throughout all these years. I thought, there are so many out there, there's no real need. But first of all, I'm getting a crazy ton of questions asking for my beginner tips of choosing your first cigars through Instagram, a few here on YouTube as well. But I thought, what better way to do it than a comprehensive video that really goes through and breaks it down, instead of just answering through DM where I can't give as much detail to everyone. So I'm coming with this video now to show you guys a few cigars that I really think you should try if you're getting into either cigars, non-Cubans, or Cubans, like I said. Now another reason why I'm doing this video is because when I'm Googling a lot of these lists that are out there, they are not great. A lot of the times they're coming from retailers, and sometimes they have a angle in mind, right? They want to sell a certain brand or whatever. And sometimes they're just kind of lazy, right? Like sometimes it's just a list of 5 or 10 really mild either Connecticut cigars, or they're just listing off the most mild Cuban cigars. And they're not really going into more thought or depth than that because they're just thinking beginner, mild, that's enough. For me, that's not really a good way of constructing the list at all, right? If you want to introduce someone to something, why give them such a tiny speck of the segment instead of giving them the entire spectrum, right? Giving them the entire idea of what's on the table. This might sound trivial, but for me, I've had a 100% hit rate with this theory so far in my life. A lot of my friends that either are into whiskey, spirits, or wine end up enjoying cigars as well. But there's a big correlation into how they enjoy these products. A lot of my friends that are very into extremely smoky, heavy, challenging whiskeys end up enjoying very heavy, challenging, full-bodied cigars as well. It's not always going to work for 100% of the population, but in my experience, it actually has been a 100% hit rate, like I said. And then my friends that like lighter lagers or lighter wines, for example, fruitier stuff, they end up being more into the lighter, more Connecticut style or Cuban cigars. So first of all, when you get into cigars, ask yourself if you are into the other kind of enjoyment sectors of life like wine, beer, whiskey, whatsoever. If you do like the more challenging, heavy stuff, you might be more into the heavier cigars. So don't shy away from them. And that's also why when I present these cigars, I want to have a little bit of everything. Like I said, it might sound silly, but it has had a 100% hit rate so far. That's why also I'm not going to just give a list of mild cigars for everyone. Now, I'm not going to give crazy heavy stuff because it might be a little bit off-putting the first time. But I do want to have a wide spectrum. I want to give a little bit of everything for when you try. So here are my lists. So this video is going to be in 2 segments. This first one is for Cuban cigars. So I have 6 Cuban cigars here. They are some of my favorites and some that are very enjoyed overall. So first of all, I'm going to go with a small cigar here. It's the San Cristóbal de la Habana El Príncipe. San Cristóbal de la Habana is a very small Cuban cigar brand. It's not one of the most popular ones. This El Príncipe is one of my favorites though. It's a small petite Corona. It's not a very massive cigar. It's a good one for your first ever Cuban to try. It's very light. It's very creamy. It's got a lot of honey notes, graham cracker. It's very nice and pleasant on the palate earlier in the day with a coffee. It's a lighter cigar, like I said. It's got a lot of natural sweetness. I really love this one. Now, based on availability, Cuban cigars nowadays are very difficult to find. So, if you can't find this one, but you can find other San Cristóbal de la Habana, they all have a similar flavor profile on the lighter side. So definitely try any out. If you can find this one, that's my go-to. Next, it's one that might not be so surprising to a lot of people. It's a cigar that's very popular nowadays. It's the Quai number 50. Again, if you can find the 54, that's also totally fine. These are also on the lighter side. I got a lot of similar notes to the San Cristóbal de la Habana, but this one is a little bit more aromatic, can have a little more fruitiness, I think sometimes a little more nuttiness. It's a fantastic cigar. It's a short Robusto, 50 ring gauge, really easy to try. This is a great one for the summer if you're trying cigars for the first time. You can pair it with wine, sparkling wine, champagne. That's what it's intended to be paired with. It's great for a summer smoke if you try to get into cigars. It's a lovely Cuban cigar, and although they might be hard to find, if you can find the 50 or the 54, go for it. Next, even less surprising, this will probably be on almost every list, but the reason I'm including it is to just fortify the reason that it is included on almost every list. It's one of the most legendary Cuban cigars out there, the Hoyo de Monterrey Epicure number 2. So this is in a classic Robusto format. It's always good to try a classic Robusto. This one is a little bit different from the other two first. Although it is light, it's got a little bit more floral aspect. It's got a little more wood. It's got a little more coffee. It's still pretty light. It's still very creamy. It's a legendary cigar for a reason. I honestly think it's probably one of the best beginner cigars overall. Probably the best beginner Cuban there is, honestly. And it's equally good for an aficionado. Like, I still love these years after smoking them the first time. So the Epicure number 2, if you can find it. The Epicure number 1 is also pretty decent. It's a little bit more challenging, a little bit more intense. So I would recommend the number 2 first. The Epicure Especial is okay. Most Hoyo de Monterrey is good for a beginner. They are on the lighter side. The number 2, though, for me is particularly good for someone starting out. Now, we've had some smaller cigars. I wanted to include something that was a bit cheaper. I want to give a full spectrum again on what's available, although I don't have any short filler cigars, so it's nothing crazy cheap. This is the H. Upmann Majestics. So this is a Cremas Vitola. It's a nice long petite Corona. It's a little bit longer than most petite Coronas. It's a long, nice, slender format. These are super cheap. They're about 6-7 euros. They are going up in price like all Cuban cigars, but they should be very easy to find. They're not super popular. I think the Vitola maybe scares some people off. It's long and slender, not like the more popular Robustos nowadays. But this is a fantastic little smoke. It's not extremely complex, but it's still got tons of that, cafe latte and nuttiness that I love from Upmann. Sometimes you do get a little bit of graham cracker as well. It's a great expression of Cuban tobacco. It's very affordable, like I said. Pretty big cigars for the price, and they are very lovely to smoke. Now, like I said, I wanted to give a more full spectrum type of deal here, not just giving you the lightest stuff. This is one of my favorites on the heavier side of Cuban cigars. This is the Ramon Allones Specially Selected. Like I said, for Cuban cigar, it's a little bit more full-bodied. It is a wonderful cigar. It's got dark fruit, a little more earth, a little more spice, although it's nothing crazy, nothing that's going to put you off on your palate. I really don't think you should shy away from this. The Ramon Allones Specially Selected is one of my absolute favorites. It's a brilliant cigar. It'll show you what heavier Cuban tobacco is like. Perhaps you love it. Then don't waste time with the lighter stuff and explore more. This is a spectacular cigar. And lastly, I felt like I couldn't do this list without bringing in my favorite. And this is also a perfect expression of medium-bodied, right down the middle Cuban tobacco. The Juan López Selección number 1. This is a Corona Gorda, which is my favorite ring gauge. 46. It's a little bit longer. It's a classic cigar. It's got nice medium-bodied flavor. There's a little bit of citrus in there. It challenges the palate a little more. It's got a nice complexity, a lot of Cuban twang, a lot of that floral stuff. It's a nice cigar. I really love this one. It is my favorite. That's why I'm including it. But I also wanted to bring in something more medium-bodied. And this isn't the most sought-after brand. It's a little under the radar. Perhaps it's easier for you to find. The Selección number 1, my favorite, had to include it. So there you have my Cuban selection, different sizes from big to small, different bodies of flavor from light to heavy. I want to include a little bit of everything. With this, you can then move on and see if you like the Ramon Allones, go for more full-bodied stuff. If you like the lighter stuff like the Hoyo de Monterrey or Quirosé, go for the lighter stuff. So this allows you to get a good idea of the entire spectrum and also allows you to keep exploring. So next we have my non-Cubans. Now this is where it gets a little more challenging because with the Cubans, the Americans are the most challenged in terms of getting their hands on them. With these, availability varies so much. So I tried to get stuff that's decently easily available, but it's not going to be for everyone. It's just impossible to do it. Still though, you can Google if some of these cigars are impossible for you to find. You can search for cigars that are similar, and maybe you will find great substitutions. Again, I could have brought out 30 cigars here, but we would be here forever. So here I've tried to do a similar thing where it's a wide variety. With non-Cubans, it's even more wide. So if you don't know, Cuban cigars in the grand scheme of things are pretty light. They're pretty light, maximum medium. So even that Ramon Allones Specially Selected that I mentioned, which was heavy for a Cuban, is still pretty dang medium for a non-Cuban cigar. So with non-Cubans, you have a lot more countries producing cigars, so you get a wide variety. So starting out, this is one of my favorite brands. It's one of my favorite cigar makers. This is Foundation. We actually did an interview with Nick Melillo, and here is his Charter Oak brand. So this is a brand that is extremely affordable. They're just $5-6. They're very, very cheap, but they're insanely good quality. So this is a Connecticut shade wrapper. It's a very mild cigar, but it's still got a lot more complexity in there. It is a little bit heavier and not so boring as a lot of other Connecticut cigars. And it's not like the other cheap Connecticut cigars where it has a lot of that bitterness, sourness, and pepper. Because that's not a great way to get introduced to this leaf. If you want to have a light Connecticut cigar, you want it to be something enjoyable, not just something very cheap, because that's easy to recommend. Try it out. It's going to be great with a coffee. It's a little bit on the lighter side. I love it, and it's great affordability. It's a good one for a beginner. So next, it's actually a cigar from a brand that is pretty known to make super heavy stuff. But this is one of their bread and butter cigars. It's the LFD, La Flor Dominicana Ligero. This is the 3000, so it's a Robusto. This is a fantastic cigar, and it's not as heavy as you think. It's the natural, so it's got an Ecuadorian Sumatra wrapper. It gives you a good idea of what that tobacco is like. Ecuadorian wrappers are extremely common nowadays, so this is a good representation. It's got that sweetness onto it, which Ecuadorian Sumatra often has. You get a little chocolatey notes in this, but with that Dominican tobacco, you're also going to get a nice nuttiness and a very well-rounded, creamy smoke. It's not that heavy. It's not going to punch you in the face like some other LFD cigars are. This is a good starter, I think, to give you a good idea of Dominican tobacco as well as that Ecuadorian wrapper. It's a great cigar to start out with, and there are a lot of similar stuff out there. So if you like this one, you know you like Dominican heavy cigars with Ecuadorian wrappers. There's tons to explore. So next is a cigar that's a little bit more boutique, meaning it's not a massive brand. And it is also quite a light cigar. It's a little bit more expensive. But again, I want to go from stuff like the Charter Oak that's super cheap to give you an impression of what a cigar of that level is, and also what the higher end stuff is like. I think that's a good way to start. Don't just get crazy cheap cigars. You're not getting a great expression. You're not getting a good idea of what's out there on the market. This is the Illusione Epernay series. Illusione is a brand that is owned by D'Angelito. It's a small boutique brand, so it's not massive, like I said. The Epernay series is a lighter series of cigars. They don't use any Ligero, so that's the name of this cigar, funnily enough, from LFD. Ligero is actually the higher priming, so it's the leaves that are higher up on the tobacco plant. They get more sun, they get more nutrients, they get thicker, richer, and heavier. So without those leaves, you get a much lighter blend. This is a more aromatic type of cigar. This is probably the best beginner cigar I could possibly find, in my opinion, because it's pretty medium bodied in terms of flavor. It's not crazy full, it's not super light, but it doesn't have that nicotine, it doesn't have that punch, it doesn't have any spice. It's just lots of rich flavor, but in a more toned down presentation. So this actually has Nicaraguan tobacco all throughout, but it's very atypical of Nicaraguan tobacco. Like I said, it's a lot lighter than you would expect. It's super sweet, it's super creamy, fruity. I mean, it's a fantastic cigar. Get it in any shape or size that you can find. I think people will love this cigar, even if you've smoked for years and you haven't tried it. If you want a lighter cigar but still super flavorful, the Illusione Epernay series is a perfect example. This will also show you, if you're a beginner, of what higher end, lower production sort of boutique brands can offer. So next up, let's get to some companies that are massive. This is the opposite. Arturo Fuente, one of the biggest in the world. They make tens of millions of cigars every year. This is their bread and butter cigar. As you notice, I have a lot of quintessential expressions of these companies. This is the 858 in natural or Cameroon. So they call it natural, but this is actually a Cameroon wrapper. So the Cameroon wrapper is one of my absolute favorite in the entire world. It's probably my favorite, actually, if you have to put a gun to my head. This is a great example of that, but in a cheaper, more affordable way. It isn't crazy expensive. Again, it's Dominican fillers and binders, so everything inside of the wrapper is Dominican. You get that nice nuttiness. There's a nice natural sweetness to that. And even more building onto that, this Cameroon wrapper will give you a classic representation of that sweet and spice, tangy sort of flavor you get from Cameroon. It's a super unique style of tobacco. I wanted to include it in the list. So you can get an idea of what that type is, because some people might love it. Then you can try some more expensive examples of it. It is a more expensive tobacco type in general, so giving a more affordable style, it's a good representation in this 858. Like I said, it's a lovely cigar. It's very complex for the price, and I think people are going to love this one as well. If you're trying it out, it's a good example of Cameroon. So getting into the last two here and into more heavy territory, here's a bit of an under-the-radar one that I think is a brilliant starter cigar for someone wanting to try something a little bit more heavy. This is the VegaFina, which is a Dominican brand. It's recently got into the United States, actually, so it's available worldwide. It's the 1998. So this is a great example of what non-Cuban cigars can be. It's a symphony of different cigar tobacco. It's a massive mix. You got Colombian tobacco in there, you got Nicaraguan, you got Dominican, even an Indonesian binder, and on top of that, one of the most common cigar wrappers in the world right now. It's an Ecuadorian Habano wrapper. That's a Cuban seed wrapper, but grown in Ecuador. It's one of the most common wrappers. It's got really nice balance to it. It's got a lovely natural sweetness, a little bit of earthiness. It's a really good cigar. This is on the heavier side, but it's not one that's super spicy, not one that's crazy heavy. It shows you what a Ecuadorian Habano wrapper can do with a lot of mixed tobacco in it. I think it's really under the radar. They're pretty cheap. If you like this, you can explore a lot more. VegaFina 1998, something a lot of people might not have heard of. It's a massive brand in Europe. It's starting to grow in the US. Great cigar. So lastly, another major player in the cigar industry. This is a cigar from Drew Estate. Now I wanted to include something that's heavy, a Maduro cigar. A lot of beginner lists don't have a Maduro, which is insane because Maduros are some of the most best-selling cigars in the entire world. It's a massive segment of the industry. I don't understand how you can introduce someone to cigars and leave out like a third of the pie and not let them test it. Drew Estate Maduro, it is heavier, but I don't think this cigar is as punch in the face as a lot of other cigars are. So this is a dark leaf, but don't let that trick you. There are a lot of cigars that look lighter but that are heavier. This Drew Estate Maduro Undercrown is not crazy spicy. It's not insanely heavy, although it is pretty rich. It's got dark leather flavors, dark chocolate, roasted coffee. You get a lot of that stuff. There is an underlying sweetness as well on this, and I think it will be enjoyable for a lot of people. And if you don't like it, well, then you've at least tried it, and then you can put that aside for a while, explore other stuff, and then come back to a Maduro cigar at a later stage. But I think it's a massive shame to not introduce someone to it. Again, this is a crazy popular cigar. This should be insanely easy to find. It's a very well-liked cigar. It is on the cheaper side as well, and it shows you a different type of Maduro tobacco. This has some Brazilian tobacco in there, so you get to try that, but it's got a Mexican San Andres wrapper. That's a type of tobacco that's become crazy popular in the last years. That's a rich, heavy, full-bodied Maduro, as you can see, but I think this is a good expression of it. It's pretty approachable for what it is, and I recommend a beginner to try it. So there you go. There is my 12 cigars, 6 Cuban, 6 non-Cuban, for you to dip your toes in the world of cigars. Again, I'm trying my best to give you a broad sense of what is out there, not giving you 10 of the same flavor profile cigars because that's going to waste a lot of your money and your time. I don't agree with that way of recommending cigars. This is from someone that, I've been smoking cigars for several years now, but I'm not too far removed from when I begun, and I remember personally actually trying a lot of light cigars in the beginning, and then finally realizing that there's so much more out there, and wow, I didn't need to spend that much time in the lighter section because there's a wide variety of cigars out there. So if you are a seasoned cigar smoker, let me know what you think of this list. Did you try any of these when you were starting out? What would you add? What would you take away? Of course, that's always fun to the discussion, and if you're trying them out, hit me up on Instagram or comment on this video and say what your experience was like. I just want to help people get into this wonderful world of cigars, and I hope this is a good way to do it. So thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.